So tell me about yourself.
Well, I'm a zookeeper at Orana Wildlife Park. I'm in my 14th year of employment there, which I really, really enjoy. It's a life passion, lifestyle type job. I'm head of New Zealand native birds and reptiles, which is also something that I'm really, really passionate about. So yeah, pretty much it's my life.
Yeah, that's right. And tell us a little bit what it's like to be a zookeeper.
Well, a zookeeper's life is rather glamorised on the TV a lot of the time. So you need to know that it is very much a job of life and death, where you have live animals or livestock. You, of course, experience death. Animals get old or injured or ill, just as humans do. So it's a job where you can go from incredible highs to all-consuming lows within 24 hours. Depending on what's going on around you, whether you've had a successful hatch or birth of something really, really rare, to losing one of your dear friends that you've worked with for 10 or so years, finally succumbs to an old age-related illness.
You like losing a member of the family?
Well, very much so, and we get attached to these individual animals, and every animal, whether it's a rhinoceros or a lion or a bird or a reptile or a domestic animal like a donkey, they all have individual personalities, and we're encouraged to become involved with these personalities so that we know every individual. So yeah, it can be shattering. Yeah.
And can you tell me about what's so special about Orana?
Well, Orana is a very large open range zoo, so it's more a wildlife park than a zoo, and we're blessed with a huge amount of land that we're able to put these large creatures in paddocks that have grass and trees, and rather than using fencing, and a lot of the time we're able to get away with moats or very inconspicuous wires, electric wires that people in there can't see, and the animals aren't bothered by them. So we display these animals in naturalistic surroundings. And another really kind of cool thing about Orana is that we're actually a charitable trust, so we're not a council-run zoo. We're the people's zoo. We do have backing from our council, so that's really cool. But very much it's the zoo of the people.
And what role is Orana Park having in conservation of animals within New Zealand?
Right. Well, we have several roles. Firstly, our zoo roles are conservation, education and recreation, with also research. And so it's a fourfold mission that we have to encompass in everything that we do, whether it be with exotic animals from overseas or native animals. Sometimes some areas of that mission are covered by different animals. So a lot of people come to Orana to see the big exotic animals. However, a lot of our conservation work of true value is done with native animals like blue duck and brown teal.
So what kind of work are you doing to help the recovery of blue duck and brown teal?
Well, we're involved in a Department of Conservation recovery program for those animals, and once again there's several roles in that. Part of it is breed as many as you can from the recommended pairings, and these animals are released back to the wild in safe areas to bolster numbers, which that's like the cream on the top, where you sleep really well at night because you know something you did is now free and where it should be in the wild. But the other really important, or several sides of that, is education and advocacy. We have about 6,000 children come through informal learning programs that get a lesson on New Zealand endangered animals. And of course our visitors, we try very hard to let them know what's going on with the creatures that are native to this country, so that they go away with positive attitudes and knowing that there is something they can do, because sometimes people think there's nothing they can do, that somebody else is going to fix the problem. But the thing I think we all need to remember is we are all responsible, and there are small things you can do, like not throwing your pie wrapper out the window, or recycling aluminium cans. We can all make a difference in conservation.
Now, what's causing the decline in the ducks, the native condemned ducks?
Well, there are lots of things, and both species are really, really different animals that live in quite different habitats, so they're threatened by different things. The first one is a really big, obvious one, and it's going to be a hot topic, I'm sure, for you, is eradicating introduced pest species. And for us, most of that is introduced mammal pests, and some of them will be really, really familiar to you. And there's a whole mustelid family that we ended up with here in New Zealand, or not the whole family, but the stoat ferret and weasel. And those animals are voracious predators of native birds and reptiles, and they were originally brought into the country to control rabbits that had been previously introduced, but of course flightless birds and reptiles that semi-hibernate in winter are much easier to catch than a rabbit running at high speed. So, yeah, welcome to New Zealand. So, yeah, and then there's also the cats, the rats, the mice, the hedgehogs, deers, pigs. Of course, the rabbits themselves do environmental damage. And then, of course, you'll feel with the introduced pest plants, things like that outcompete native plants in some areas, which cut back food supply. So they're common themes there. However, habitat modification is a big one, and that has had particular impact on brown teal. They're a wetland type bird, and of course we love to drain wetlands and turn them into farmlands, so that instantly cuts down habitat. Blue duck are a fast running mountain stream bird. We kind of tend to turn them into hydro dams, so that can also affect them. And another one with brown teal, interestingly enough, is another introduced pest species. I'll say there, I'm sorry, I may be condemned for that, but is the mallard duck. It actually can hybridise with brown teal, and therefore these hybrids are no longer brown teal. Which extinction with through hybridisation. That's quite another scary thing.
So is that something you'd probably term as genetic pollution or something?
Oh, I really don't know the proper term, but I quite like that one. Yeah, I'll use that in the future, I think. Yeah.
So how does the recovery program, how do you set it up? How does it work?
Well, they're actually really, really quite complex things. The Department of Conservation normally set up the recovery program, and they have specific aims in that, and it is the recovery and sustainability of a species, and they will use whatever tools are available to them. And there's a whole team involved in recovery of species. There's DOC, and then there's also community groups who do help pest plants and pest mammal eradication and replanting to bring back bush or wetland habitat. And then there's zoos and wildlife parks who do the education and the captive breeding for release. There are also private people that have gone to a huge effort to get their own permits to breed some of these species for release as well, yes. And they do it out of their own private funding. You have to incorporate landowners, because you can't only preserve a habitat within DOC or government land. Those lands are bordered by farms. So everybody needs to have a hand in preserving our species. So really the captive site, although it's very complex and time consuming, is only a small part of the overall picture. It's a big team.
So if people want to get involved, like as you were talking about farmers or general public, how do they go about approaching? Do they approach Orana Park or DOC?
Well, in every area there are set different projects going on. It all depends on basically the area and the community there. A lot of these initiatives are community-led, and locally I believe there is a group working on the Styx Mill River, and popping up in Canterbury. There are lots and lots of things. On the peninsula there is another group, and a Port Hills group, so it all depends on where you live. The local council or Department of Conservation could probably head you in the right direction more than I could from Orana. However, if you're one of our neighbours at Orana, we've got really, really special things going on right in our own backyard, and we all need to act as a team, creating wildlife corridors of plants and things like that as well.
So how's this recovery program working at the moment? What's the success? Are you finding it successful?
Well, the brown teal, the Parteki program is fantastic at the moment. Really, the numbers have climbed so much in only about 5 years. About 5 years ago, there were about 1,200 of the species left, and that's really,
That's
you
the
know,
whole entire country.
yeah, which means the whole entire world, yeah. So, you know, any child, well, most children about 10 years old can count to that amount. It's not a huge amount of animals. Now there's about 1,800 in the wild, and that is a huge jump. They've been releasing about 100 captive bred birds a year for the last 2 years, and only a little under that the year before. But those animals are then going into protected sites in the wild and reproducing themselves. So you get a culmination kind of running effect. All these animals breeding, and the population soon can build if it's protected in the wild. You can't just breed these animals and chuck them back into your backyard. They have to go into sites that are being looked after, predator monitored or fenced, island sanctuaries. Basically, a lot of New Zealand is unsafe for our native animals now.
So there's obviously a lot of monitoring going on.
Indeed. A lot of the brown teal that are released actually have transmitters on them. But before they're released, they go through this whole veterinary process of quarantine so that no diseases go back to the wild that may have been picked up in a captive situation. But they also, a lot of them get little harnesses fitted, and that's just not a matter of putting the harness and transmitter on the day before release. That's got to be on a week before, so your animal gets used to it. Otherwise, some animals can't adjust to the fact they're wearing a backpack. So all these little animals get their harnesses on, off they go, and they're able to track them for the duration of the battery on the harness normally, which they'll try to recapture those animals and change the battery. And they have mortality monitors on them and all, so if that little transmitter does not move for a certain amount of hours, that normally means the animal's dead, and they can go and get the remains and discover what actually killed it. Was it hit by a car? Was it got by a stoat catch? Did it die of starvation because of an environmental factor? So we're releasing way too many brown teal to put transmitters on them all. It's a very expensive undertaking. But I do believe with the blue duck program, they're transmitting every bird at the moment. Blue duck are a lot harder to breed than brown teal, unfortunately. So many fewer animals are actually ever released to the wild, so therefore they're more likely to be transmitted. Yeah.
So what makes them harder to breed?
Well, yeah, I wish I knew.
It's not into each other, or?
No, they do the breeding themselves, but it's more when the hatching duckling stage comes into it. Brown teal seem to do everything themselves. They're pretty bomb-proof, and as long as you're providing them with a habitat they like, a reliable food source, and don't cause them too much stress, like have cars driving past their enclosure all the time or whatever, they just reproduce very well. And when their ducklings are born, the ducklings clue on to fake captive food very quickly. But the problem with the blue duck or Theo is the incubation period is much longer, but it's when the ducklings hatch is a big issue. They do not learn to feed quick enough on captive diets. We can't replicate the entire wild diet enough to sustain them, so therefore they perish. So we have to take these ducklings, well, in fact, we don't even take them as ducklings, we take them before they hatch, do the last part of incubation in the incubators, which is very intensive, And then when the ducklings hatch, they're weighed, they're banded, they're monitored every day. They're weighed. Every individual, you note down every bug they eat, every movement basically they do, until you know that they're gaining weight and past the danger zone. Basically, we do that because they're priceless. You know, every one of them are priceless. Some people will say, why do you go to all that effort, you know? But you couldn't put a price on the heads of these animals. They're irreplaceable.
So, because the population's so small, what kind of issues are involved for the staff in getting genetic diversity to maintain populations and prevent inbreeding? What kind of steps do you take there?
Well, that's a really important question, because you can't just breed pairs together and then get the daughter and put her to the father and stuff like that. You create quite serious genetic bottlenecks, and basically, ethically, zoos are bound to hold their animals as an genetically viable situation as possible. Well, ideally what we want is a snapshot of the wild genetics of these animals. So when, or should they be, ever released to the wild, they're of benefit to those wild populations. It's not just up to the zoo, and it's not up to me. I can't do a dial a duck. Hello, I would like an unrelated whatever from the wild. It's all done through species coordinators, and species coordination is a really, really important role. Often these people will be volunteers, not paid for their role. They may be zoo-based volunteers, like myself. I coordinate a small native program, and my zoo funds my time spent on that for the betterment of all of that species in captivity. However, I do know private coordinators who put a lot of effort into it, and one of those, in fact, is the brown teal coordinator, is a private person, and he is part of the most successful captive reintroduction recovery type program really at this point in time. So basically, all the info is put into a big computer program, which you have to make sure you put everything in correctly or it doesn't work. And the program can help you work out recommended pairings on a genetic basis, or if your program's big enough and there's enough unrelated animals, you can quite easily say, well, that animal was nowhere near related to that animal, but sometimes it comes down to a bit closer to that than that when there's less animals available. And they make the recommendation, do an annual report on it, you get your recommendation, you do what you're told. And you make every effort to do what you're told within a given time frame. And that can mean shipping an animal to Auckland Zoo or any zoo or private person, and you may be attached to this animal. You may have had it 10 years, and it's like, Fluffy, I've got to send Fluffy away. Oh no. But you think, go Fluffy, go be happy, procreate, and that is part of your job. And in some cases, you'll just hold animals for display only, and they'll be elderly animals that are beyond reproduction years, or they may be over genetically represented animals. In other words, a male that's bred so many times that
nobody wants him.
Nobody wants to have any more offspring from him, otherwise everything starts getting too related. So the coordinator role is really important. So that's how it works nationally, but that same thing works internationally with things like tigers and Siamang gibbons. You have a national or regional coordinator, like Australia and New Zealand, and then you have a Australasian coordinator who does the whole Indian kind of Malaysia type, Australia and New Zealand in as well, and then you'll have a international coordinator, and between those people they work out recommendations for animals all over the world. You could be sending or receiving an animal from Rotterdam, whatever is best for the betterment of that species.
So, as in New Zealand, like we have tigers and elephants and the like, one for people to have a look at, and also to save genetic.
Yep.
Do any overseas places have any of our native animals?
Very, very few, and they now have to control or maintain their genetics to the best that they can with the stock that they have. Many, many years ago it was common policy for New Zealand to gift animals overseas, I suppose. I'm probably exaggerating. It did happen. I don't know enough to say it was common policy. But we no longer do that, and in fact a lot of countries object to sending their native animals overseas now. So there are kiwi and tuatara overseas, I know that. And several other species have been sent overseas 30, 40 years ago. The zoos like, I believe, is it St. Louis has tuatara, and then there, I believe some in Berlin, they are now have to get together to swap any genetics and keep these tuatara going overseas, because we cannot send them anymore. So, if there's kiwi in Japan and kiwi in England, well, now they need to work together to preserve kiwi internationally, yeah.
So why are we not allowed to donate some of our animals if it's going to help New Zealand as a whole?
Well, a lot of it, I believe, comes down to biosecurity risk. The possibilities of any animals we've sent overseas ever coming back to this country or their offspring, so slim. So therefore sending our national icon that we are still learning about breeding in New Zealand, sending them overseas is of absolutely no benefit to the conservation program, except for people overseas will get to see and learn about kiwi. We cannot bring back any of those birds to release to the wild in New Zealand in case they come back with Newcastle's disease or something that is a bird disease that we may or may not have in New Zealand, but, So, really, water's closed in a lot of ways.
What can people do to help Orana Park, or help not necessarily just New Zealand ducks, but just animals?
Conservation in general. I think the whole thing comes back to, walk lightly on this earth while we're here. So, a lot of people think life's that this country and everything we do is a right, where really it comes down to, it's actually a privilege. So, we all have a part to play. So the whole go back to, take only photographs, leave only footprints, and make your impact on the earth as low as possible. Think about the consequences of your actions. If I'm going to pour the sump oil down my drain, where's it going to end up? What's it going to do long term? Short term is quite different to long term. It's up to all of us. I'm big on the pest animal front, and I think a lot of us need to look at our domestic cat ownership. Once again, it's a privilege, not a right. And I believe that here in New Zealand we are second in the world per capita cat owners, which is really, really a lot of cats in the land of birds and reptiles. And I'm not saying go and get fluffy put down or anything, just be wise. A bell will help warn some animals. Keep your cat indoors at night, because birds roost and sleep at night, and so they're a bell won't save them then. If you happen to have the absolute privilege, and oh my, I'm so jealous of you, to live in a national park, perhaps weigh up the possibility, do I need to own a cat? Or is my environment that I live in, and I'm so lucky to live in, is that just enough to satisfy me and the animals that surround me here? Just think about sustainability and keeping environments nice.
And also having your cat spayed too.
Oh, it's a very important thing.
Often when people, they might shift house and then leave their cat behind, and they just turn feral, don't they?
Yeah, indeed.
Survive themselves, and they just
indeed. And despite what a lot of people think, your children, Bobby, Sue, or whatever, do not need to see your cat give birth to kittens to learn about procreation. We can show them that in so many other ways, or you can explain it to them, or take them to a city farmyard or Orana, and they get to see baby animals there too. It is a great way to learn, to see things, but that isn't the best reason for letting your cat have a litter.
Well, thank you very much for your time today,
No
Tara.
problem.
I've learned lots of very interesting stuff, so I'll be making sure my pet's definitely locked up at night.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Yeah.